Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Do It With Rio. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Janice. I actually met Janice maybe 3 or 4 years ago at a ASB event when you were in the middle of your MBA. So fantastic to talk to you now. Hey, Janice, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit?
Yeah, hey John, I'm so happy to be here. And you're right, we did meet about 3 to 4 years ago. And we came full circle because I actually interviewed you for my ASB
Mm.
podcast. I'm not sure if you remember that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And today I really want to talk specifically about MBAs. I do so many talks about switching careers and giving career advice. And one of the questions that has started coming up recently, as so many people are thinking about switching careers at the moment with the effects of the pandemic, employment trends are changing, and people are wondering, should they do an MBA? They're researching what is the value that it could add to my career. Is it useful for my particular career? And I don't always have those answers offhand. And most of the articles that you find online are written by or on behalf of MBA schools. So it's not necessarily, although it's not wrong information, it's not necessarily the best place to go if you're making a very big decision like this. So I thought it'd be fantastic to get your opinion, hear what you have to say about having done an MBA and now having finished one and gone into the next stage of your life, and see what the process was like for you. But actually, what was your decision making process when you decided that you wanted to think about doing an MBA? How did you approach it? How did you make that decision?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So, just a bit of context about my background. To start with, I was actually legally trained. So, my
Mm,
background is in law, but I'm currently working in a beauty company based in Hong Kong. So, I'm actually in Hong Kong for work,
mm,
where I do HR policy and strategy. So, you know, for my career trajectory, I essentially pivoted out of legal practice after having done the MBA. So a
mm,
little bit of the story, right? You asked about my thought process when I decided to do the MBA. I was actually, I went to law school and I practiced as a lawyer after my studies in Malaysia. And while I really did enjoy my studies, I really enjoyed law school. I loved bar school, but I didn't enjoy legal practice. And, you know, I gave it a fair shot, slightly under 2 years. But I think during that time, I kind of knew that this really wasn't what I wanted to do in the long term. So there was a
yeah.
lot of soul searching involved, right? And I did
Mm,
think, okay, this is really not where I want to be. But the biggest problem I had at the time was that I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what the next step would look like. So I felt a bit lost. And at that point of time, I was really done with bar school. I had not imagined that I would go on to do an MBA because bar school was already very, very
yeah.
intellectually taxing. So I was like, nah, I don't think I'm gonna go to school again. But at a point of time, my best friend, who was also a former lawyer, she then embarked on an MBA at the Asia School of Business. So it was
Mm,
through a lot of conversations with her and having known, like, what she was exposed to, what she was learning, that made me decide, even though at that point I felt slightly young, and we can talk about that a bit later, just kind of 2 years.
mm,
Felt a bit like, I needed maybe a bit more time. I decided to just apply for the MBA anyway at the Asia School of Business, and I got in because it. I gave myself a fair shot.
mm,
I was like, okay, I got it. And the rationale for me to say yes to doing it eventually is because I thought, an MBA, it would open doors for me. It will allow me to explore different types of careers, different industries, and present a lot of networking opportunities, which is what I eventually got to experience.
mm. I can imagine. But actually, had you heard of Asia School of Business before your friend introduced you?
Yeah, so a little bit about the Asia School of Business. It's fairly new, right? I
Mm,
think it's about we hit 5 years old recently, so it is a very young school. And to be very honest, before my best friend embarked on the MBA at the ASB, Asia School of Business, I had not heard of the school before. So it
mm,
was really through, my best friend and having
yeah.
gone to a luncheon that was organized by the ASB Ladies Association. That was my first exposure, towards the Asia School of Business. And of course, 5 years later, since its inception, it's already gotten pretty high traction, especially around
Mm,
Asia. I'm sure, you've attended a lot of our schools,
yeah.
different networking events, career events. So I'm sure, like, by now things are a lot different than it was a few years ago.
I went to their new campus a few weeks ago, which was fantastic. But I guess it's very easy for me to take it for granted that people in Malaysia know who they are, because I'm in the HR space, I'm in the recruitment space, I go to a lot of the events, so I know so much about them. But actually, I think a lot of Malaysians don't realize that we have a very high quality, already fairly globally recognized MBA school right here in KL. And it's something that more Malaysians should take advantage of. But
Absolutely.
how has it impacted your career since you moved on? Has it helped you hit the career goals that you hoped it would, or has it actually completely changed your career goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it completely changed my career goals. As I already mentioned earlier, right? Like I went into the MBA not sure really of where I
Mm,
wanted to go, and I think that's something that's not often said. You don't really hear
mm,
that on Poets and Quants or even on all these articles that you find online. It seems, from the articles that you read, it seems that everybody would have gone into business school laser focused on what exactly they want to achieve. But
mm,
I found that really wasn't the case when I met different people and I spoke to
yeah.
different people. So I went into business school thinking that I would go into consulting, of course,
Okay.
or
Mm,
investment banking, one of those the typical post MBA careers. But having gone through the program and got my exposure in different types of industries, I actually pivoted into HR. And to your question, how has it impacted my career? It's completely transformed my career and allowed me to do like a triple switch. So this is a term that you might hear in the MBA circle, right? When you
mm,
talk about triple switch, is a switch of industry, role, and location, and it's a switch that
mm.
most career advisors would say is very risky slash difficult to achieve. But I mean, honestly, thankfully, because thanks to ASB and some luck involved in the process, I did manage to achieve that switch of moving to Hong Kong to do HR. So
Mm,
it's been very transformational in terms of my career trajectory, and I think more than that, even on like a very personal front, right? It's helped me battle a lot of self-limiting beliefs, imposter
mm,
syndrome, and having
mm.
those, as a lawyer, I can't do X, Y, Z. I can't math. I can't. There are a lot of
Yeah.
self-limiting beliefs that I had during the program and of course before the program. But I felt that having gone through it, it's already helped me see that there's a lot that I could actually achieve.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And obviously, it's very important to focus your career on things that you're passionate about and things that you love doing. Um, but also a career is there to make money, so that you can live the lifestyle that you want and do all these other things. But so, do you think an MBA is just good for allowing you to follow your passions and switch careers to different careers that you think are more fulfilling? Or do you actually think an MBA is a good investment for the future in terms of the money that you're paying for the MBA and the time that you take out compared to the salaries that it allows you to demand when once you graduate?
I think that's a very important question that you asked, right? Because um, a lot of people often talk about when they think about should I pursue an MBA or not, it normally is coupled with like the upsides that an MBA can
Mm,
bring. So I think my short answer to that is that I can't definitively say that it's a
mm,
good or bad investment, but it can be a very good investment. And so I think what I can offer instead are maybe things that you should think about. Think about what is it that you want to achieve out of the MBA and whether you can achieve that goal without an MBA. Because as you mentioned, right, an MBA involves a lot of investment of time, investment of money. I think the financial costs associated with it often can be very, very high. And that's why
mm,
it's also important to consider, at the stage of the career of life where you're at right now, can you reasonably afford to take that investment? And
yeah.
also another thing to consider is, will the school that you're applying to be able to give you funding? So, hint, the ASB does offer really good sponsorship. I'm not sponsored to say this, but it did help a lot with my decision to
Yeah.
take it or not to take it. So, and also in considering that, whether it's a good investment or not, it also depends on the branding of the school, right? Because with different schools that you go to, you get different ROI for your investment.
Mm,
So I think, one risk that I understandably took on when I decided to go to ASP was that it was a young school, So even though it had the MIT brand, it had the Central Bank of Malaysia brand, it was still a very young school. And there was the risk that employers might not recognize it so much as like
Yeah.
a household name. But, at the end of the day, it worked out well. And not just for myself, but a lot of my classmates who went on to Fortune 500 companies,
Mm.
right? So the branding of the school, the season of life that you're in, can you take on that, financial cost, the cost of time, and also that time off out of your career where you're taking a 2-year break instead of progressing
Yeah.
upwards, right? So there are a lot of upsides associated, but there are also some other questions to consider when you're deciding whether to do the MBA or not.
I know a lot of young entrepreneurs decide to do MBAs, but they often feel they're not ready to launch their own business. They don't have the knowledge, so they want to do the MBA to get the knowledge, and as you say, maybe go into management consultant and work with other entrepreneurs, helping them launch their own businesses before they try it themselves. But do you think there's an argument to be made for the entrepreneurial types who are doing their MBA in order to learn about launching a business? Do you think there's a case to be made that they should invest the money in starting a business in the first place and just jump into it rather than investing that money in an MBA?
Yeah, really interesting question. I mean, I'm not an entrepreneur myself, so I can't speak on behalf of that, but I can talk about what I've observed, I think. So, I think in this case, once again, it's a yes and no situation, right? There are a lot of success stories about
Mm.
entrepreneurs having gone to MBA school and meeting their other half, their other business half. Like you look at
Yeah.
Hui Ling and Anthony Tan being the biggest success case of two HBS students who went on to create Grab. But
Mm.
I do believe that they are the minority, right? Because I have actually spoken to a lot of different entrepreneurs, especially for my podcast. And a lot of them said that they actually didn't have a business degree. They didn't go to business school. And what they experienced was that starting their own business was a crash course for them for an MBA. So they actually didn't find that they needed to go down the route to actually do an MBA, take 2 years out, because 2 years is a long time, or even
Yeah.
1.5 years is a long time that you could be spent building your product, but you're in school instead. But if you look at it, you flip the switch, you look at it in another perspective, it could be a good place for you to, let's say, get the fundamentals. Because in business school, we do learn a lot of frameworks. There are a lot of, like business canva model, the SWOT
Mm.
analysis, things like that, which could form very good fundamentals for you. So it really depends on your style as well. If you're someone who likes to be on the ground, get the ground running, learn from your mistakes, then I do
Mm.
think, like, go for it, build your own business and learn the lessons. Might be the hard way, but at least you get to learn the lessons by creating it. But if you're someone who prefer to, have these frameworks, learn the fundamentals, and even build your network from business school, then it
Mm.
might actually supercharge your business. Because I actually do have a classmate that I was classmates with during my time in the MBA, and
Mm.
he is what you call, the hustler entrepreneur. He was constantly on the phone, always in and out of class, taking calls for his business, and it was just like he never slept, because he was working and working as well. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
felt that, looking at his life, there were times where I wondered, like, did he actually need to do an MBA? But I could see how doing an MBA, especially learning like things like governance, which might not be something that entrepreneurs
Yeah.
normally think about, that
Yeah.
was something that helped him set the fundamentals for his business in terms of making sure the compliance are met and coming up with very structured frameworks, even looking at things like compensation that he got to
Yeah.
learn about. And I think having had that conversation with him, he did mention that he definitely didn't regret his time at school and in fact benefited a lot from it. So
Mm.
it depends on the kind of entrepreneur that you are
Mhm.
and your personality, I suppose.
And you mentioned, meeting other people and networking. My two co-founders, Ben and Bill, co-founders of Rio HR, they also met during their time in INSEAD.
Wow.
And I've interviewed many people and spoken to many people in my network who have had the same experience. The post MBA, the key value for many people seems is that that's where they meet people who they go on to do business with, whether it's being hired by them in another company 5 years later, 10 years later, or actually co-founding a company with them. The networking value of being in a 2-year course with I don't know how many other people are in a course, but that many people who are so invested in their own future and so ambitious about their own future that they're willing to spend that amount of money and that amount of time on it. Being surrounded by those people is valuable in itself, right? You're always told to surround
Absolutely.
yourself with positive people, with successful people, and doing an MBA does exactly that, right? And I think a lot of people, the actual networking aspect is as valuable as the knowledge gaining um, aspect. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think obviously, being in B school, one of the key benefits you get from it are the theoretical aspects, are the knowledge you get learning about operations, how a business works. But for me, I do resonate with that. I think the biggest value I got out of it are the people that I've met, especially coming from an industry that was very consuming, and it seemed like most of my circle was just only lawyers. But having gone through business school, it's opened my eyes
Yeah.
to a whole world of people from different professions, different companies, even culturally diverse
Mm.
people that I've got to work with. So I do think that, the networking aspect, it's definitely the biggest value that, I mean,
Mhm.
personally, I've gotten that out of the MBA. But, an important note that you mentioned, actually, like, it's there, but you honestly get out of it what you put into it. So
Yeah.
if you go into business school with the mindset of, I want to score straight A's and get a 4.0 CGPA, which is important, I think. But I think the bigger value that I get out of it is the connections that you meet, right? The networks that you've made who
Yeah.
will go on to become lifelong friends or even business partners. So yeah, definitely the networking aspect, I would say, key, huge, benefit that one
Mm.
would normally get out of the MBA. But you got to put in the work. You have
Yeah.
to be proactive and go out to meet people, right?
Definitely. Do you think there is a right time or a wrong time in someone's career to do an MBA? Do you think age is a factor, or do you think it makes no difference?
Mm-mm. I think this is a question that doesn't really get asked that much. And I think for me, I wouldn't say there's a wrong time to do it. But I having gone through that, right? As I mentioned earlier,
Mm.
I did feel those fears in the beginning before doing an MBA because I felt
Mm.
too, so-called young for it. Not young age wise, but just young experience wise. So I would say there's no wrong timing per se, because I did have classmates who were
Mm.
really young, like they went into school at the age of 24, right? And they
Mm.
were the youngest of the class and they excelled anyway. But for me personally, I do think that there is a better time to do an MBA. So for me, I would say minimum maybe of 3 years of working experience. And why I say that is because a lot of the topics in school, it has a very practical, actionable element to it. There are a
Mm.
lot of classes that we go to that requires a lot of real life experience sharing and a lot of contribution from, like, during my time at work, what did I experience, what did I see. So I felt that as much as I was able to benefit from all my friends
Mm.
experiences and sharings, we've had people who were in there, who worked for 15 years, right? Not trying to give away their age, but they were very seasoned and they were very
Yeah.
senior, and I felt that I absorbed so much from that. But at some points I felt like, oh, I don't know if they could absorb the same from me, if I could be able to
Mm.
give out that same amount
Yeah.
of value, because of the mere fact that I was just, 2 years into my profession. So therefore I didn't have that much experience to share in that way. But I mean, of course, we all make up for it in different ways. But I do think that in order to really, really benefit fully from the experience and to be able to even just apply those theories into the practical, probably 3 years, 3 to 4 years would be kind of like a good time to think
Mm.
about doing an MBA.
Got it. It's funny, I do so many career talks and webinars, and one of the questions that come up is, "Am I too old to switch careers now?" And
Mm,
it's funny when you speak to people who ask. I mean, I'm 41. Uh, when I speak to people in their 40s and they say I'm too old to do this, and I can't switch jobs because the company judge me because of my age. I
mm.
tell them, well, when I speak to younger people, they say they get judged because they're too young. It doesn't matter
It's
whether
true.
you're young or old. If you see it as a hurdle, it will be a hurdle. If you see
Mm,
your age as a positive thing, as in the experience you've accrued, the knowledge that you have, then it's not a hurdle anymore. It's a positive.
Yes,
And
you're right.
it's funny.
Youth can be an experience. Youth can be an
Yeah,
asset as well.
exactly. And it's just about how you see it and how you frame it in your own mind, and after that how you brand it to people. But it's interesting how people do see certain aspects about themselves as a negative, when really they've had negatives at every stage of their life. Those negatives just change, and they focus on the negatives rather than the positives that they can take forward. But would you would you recommend that when someone is choosing an MBA, they should have a specific goal in mind, as in a specific outcome that they want from the MBA, or do you think it is fair to use it as a way to find your way in your career?
Hmm. I think it's useful to have a goal. I don't think one should feel too terrible about themselves if they don't know what they want to achieve
Mm,
out of the MBA exactly, because I feel like I resonate to the latter, right? I went into
mhm.
it not knowing exactly what I
Yeah,
wanted to do. At that point, I had a brief, vague idea of perhaps going to management consulting or investment banking, and I did set out different action steps in order to help me achieve that
yeah,
milestone, achieve that goal. Whether that was a goal that I ultimately wanted to strive towards, too, that's a whole different story altogether. But I definitely think that it is important to have a clear goal, a
mm,
purpose that you want to strive towards, because if you don't have a short-term goal that you have, even a short, medium, or long-term goal that you have in mind, you wouldn't know why you're in it, right? You would be in it for the wrong reason sometimes, and it would be harder for you to persist and to persevere through times that are difficult and through the very big challenges that come your way. And with the MBA, it's not something that's a walk in the park, right? Even if you're someone who's
yeah.
experienced and you're someone who's worked for many, many years, there still comes a time where you will learn so many new things and you will feel challenged. All of us felt challenged in certain points of the MBA. So if you
Mm,
don't have a clear goal as to why you're doing what you're doing, I think it would make the struggle just, you won't be able to survive through it, and you might even drop out of the program, which is what happens to a lot of MBA students, right? They go into
mm,
it, and from stories that I've heard, they don't really have a clear goal of what they want to achieve. And so when times get hard or they go through certain roadblocks, they then drop out of school because they decide it's no longer worth it. So I
mm,
do agree with having a goal in mind, having something to strive towards, but I think it's okay if the plans change. It's okay if upon new information presented upon you, you decide to pivot, because that's what happens. That's life.
yeah.
It's very rarely it will be a linear kind of trajectory. Sometimes it's squiggly, and that's completely fine.
It's interesting because, again, when I'm talking to people, and they basically say how bored they are in their careers, and that they want to change, and that they're thinking about doing an MBA. Not that I disagree with doing an MBA, but sometimes it seems as if they're doing that MBA as their kind of eat, pray, love moment. Um, they're using it because they're just bored with what they're doing, and they think the MBA will solve everything, without actually thinking what would make me not bored? What would I be passionate about? What would I love? They're just going in with it, thinking that it will solve things. And that's not the case, right? It can add so much to what you do, but it's not going to solve all the problems that you have with not knowing what you want to do out of a career. But actually, once you graduated, how how did you feel about yourself? Did you feel that you were suddenly a different caliber of person? Did you feel that you had an advantage over other job seekers who didn't have MBAs?
Yeah, such an interesting question, because I think it's important to put it in context as well, right? I graduated not in a time that was usual. It
Mm,
was during the year the
mm,
pandemic struck.
yeah,
So my
yeah,
goodness, it was a stressful time to graduate in. I mean,
yeah,
all of us who went into the MBA, we went in with grand plans, right? But the reality was we were coming out in a time where companies were freezing jobs, and unemployment was at a really
yeah.
high stage. At that point, it wasn't a great resignation. It was just the great company freezing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah,
it was a very stressful time. I wouldn't say that I felt like I had an advantage, right? Because it also depends at the market where your school is based in. In a market like Malaysia, right, which I feel that there are many companies that value MBAs, right? Especially the MNCs, companies that are sort of aware of the value that an MBA can bring. But I think for the most bit, I realized that especially with local sentiments, right? Some of them felt that MBAs were just overpriced grads.
Yeah.
So it was a bit difficult, and definitely for my batch, we graduated in a tough time, and it was really difficult. Even a lot of friends of mine who secured jobs, even before the pandemic hit, the moment it hit, a lot of their offers got rescinded. So it was
Yeah.
definitely a challenging time to graduate.
No, I can imagine. But you got your position via ASB, right? It was one of the projects there that you did with a company. Is,
Correct.
is,
So
that, is
I
that
was
is that
one
quite
of the
common?
luckier ones.
Is it
Sorry?
quite common?
Sorry, could you repeat your question?
Is it quite common for that to happen?
Ah, so I wouldn't say it's something that's common, but it's happened to quite a few of my friends, and especially during my year, it was something that happened. I think it was one of the years where we had the most sort of conversion rate, or whatever
Mm,
they call it, right?
yeah.
In the previous years, it wasn't that common, but somehow in my year, there was quite a few of us who actually got converted from the summer internship to the full-time role. So in a way, I feel, really blessed because I got a conversion after one of my internship programs, which was
Mm.
offered as part of the module during the ASB program. So I actually signed my offer before the pandemic hit. So thankfully, I managed to secure something before all the freezing happened. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was actually a internship turn full-time offer.
It's interesting because the internships are quite intense, right? And the projects that you do, they're very intense with the companies that you do these projects with. And in many ways, they are an interview, right? It's like a super advanced interview, um, where you do get the chance to meet so many people. And it surprises me that actually more people don't get their post graduation job this way. Actually, um, do you think MBA students assume that they will be able to demand higher salaries when they graduate? Do you think there's a bit of delusion around that, or do you think it is quite standard that they get paid a higher rate than when they started their MBA?
Yeah, I think for sure, right? Because that's the main value proposition of an MBA. That's the main sell, right? Like with the
Mm,
schools, when they come and convince you, it's always that, okay, you will get to supercharge your career. You will get to, for those who are looking to supercharge, they will be promoted 2 levels up. For those who are looking
mm,
to pivot, you get to pivot. And the value proposition of having a higher salary at the end of it, it's definitely there, it's present,
mm.
right? And for people who do it, I'm not surprised because we take 2 years out of our sort of career
Yeah.
trajectory to do this, and you invest all of that time, you invest all of that money. So unsurprisingly, there is an assumption from MBA grads that there will be a salary bump for sure. And I mean, at least observing most of my friends, everybody got some sort of a salary bump, especially
Mm,
the ones who are based now in Europe and US, right? Where in
yeah.
those markets, they
Mm,
understand the value of an MBA. So definitely, for roles that are hiring MBAs, there's definitely some sort of salary increase inbuilt in it. Whereas in Malaysia, in Asia, I think there's still some understanding. Of course, it's picking up. I think especially with ASB getting the word out there are more and more companies who are understanding the value that they can bring. But it's still a work in progress, I would say.
mm.
But for sure, I do see that salary increase that's present. But it's at the end of the day, honestly, I do think it's how you package, and that conversation that we had, right? It's how you package and how you articulate what you can bring to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is interesting how they are perceived in different markets. But also this with the pandemic, it's there's certain interesting, maybe you might say even positive things which have come out of the pandemic, and one of them, it has disrupted a lot of industries. I mean, even my own industry, HR. Part of the success of Brio HR is that we're cloud based, and we launched at a time when so many companies were using server based software, and suddenly they had to work remotely, and they had to turn to cloud alternatives. But also during the pandemic, online learning has massively increased, and the industry has started to transform. Do you think that will have an impact on MBAs, with the access to high quality learning online through learning apps, and things like that? Do you think that will impact the value of an MBA?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I only experienced about 3 months of the online learning during the time where I
Mm,
was graduating, and it was hard. Having been used to in sitting in class and being able to bounce ideas off my
mm,
classmate, I think all of us struggle. We found it quite difficult, but more
yeah,
than that, I think the teachers were struggling for the most bit. They had to adapt to using
yeah,
Zoom and knowing how to deliver their lessons in ways that were engaging, and they had to technologically adapt as well. I don't think the value of an MBA would intrinsically decrease just because it's being taught online, right? And the value is still there. If you were to say, I graduated from HBS, the class of 2022 or 2023, people would still regard you highly, right? Because of the brand of the school, or even from ASB
yeah.
2022, it's still highly regarded.
Mhm.
But I think it's more so for the participants, right? It's for the students that had to
Yeah,
go through the program in a mostly online or hybrid way. And the truth is that it's a completely different experience. And so I think it's also something important for these people who are aspiring MBA grads who want to think about applying to an MBA. This is some of the trade-off that you might have to experience. It's not the same in the past where you would be able to bounce ideas off each other, go on projects, travel freely in and out of the
yeah.
country. These are some trade-offs that you would have to accept, but obviously there are still upsides to doing an MBA even in a virtual and hybrid environment. I think many schools have adapted very, very well to it. So yeah,
Mm.
value
I
wise,
imagine
it's
it is. Yeah. I imagine it is tough on the lecturers. I mean, it's not the same, but my kids have great teachers in their school, but when it's switched to remote teaching, they
ooh,
they'd never done it before, and it takes a long time for them to adapt. How to keep a 5-year-old engaged on a screen is completely different to when it's in person. So I'd imagine it is very hard. But I think that covers all the areas that I wanted to talk about. Janice, thank you so much for joining me today. As I said, I do so many career talks and so many webinars about careers. When people ask me about doing an MBA, it's an area that I don't really have the knowledge to talk about, whether it's a good for them, whether it's bad for them, whether they should wait. So this has really helped, and I hope it's helped the audience. So Janice, I know you're in quarantine at the moment, so I hope this has helped relieve some of the quarantine boredom. And thank you so much for joining me today.
thank you. It's been such a pleasure, John. Take care.
Take care, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and do catch up with us for the next episode. Bye everyone.
Bye.